Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fialka. Today's September 14, 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with JP Olsen. Is that the correct way to pronunciate it?
It is. Yes. Thank you, Jerry.
Where are you calling in from?
I'm actually in Greencastle, Indiana, about an hour outside of Indy and an hour outside of Bloomington.
Love it. What's the best thing for a human being?
Love.
It's the answer I get the most. I agree with you. That's a good one. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Well, if I can break into two things, emotional information would be music, and factual information, I would say a podcast would be the two, and then a combination of receiving information and also getting a sense of beauty film. Yeah, so it'd really be three things. Yeah.
That is a good list. I love it. Your contemporary saying podcast. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
It's a really interesting question. I'm going to say, you got me thinking deeper than I ordinarily would. I would say to prove their own existence and their own consciousness.
Yeah, you're anticipating a lot. Prove own existence and consciousness. Boy, you got ESP, you're anticipating our questions. And JP, you really get it. Having quiet and thinking, you don't have to feel like you got to bang off the answers. Like,
Yeah.
People think, well, I asked you a question, you got to answer immediately.
Yeah.
I always love when people take time, they can think, whatever. Is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented by humans?
I think it's innate.
Yeah.
But what do I know? I mean, I'm wrong about many things, but that's what I would say.
That's why you're on a podcast called I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. But, this is, again, what I'm after is your hunch, your guess. Some of these questions people go, well, I'm not a neuroscientist. I goes, well, I don't care. I mean, I'm just asking for your guess, your hunch, your intuition, So I like too that you broke down information as emotional and fact at the beginning, because that we'll explore that too. In regards, this is almost the question: do thoughts create emotions?
Yes.
Is thinking more innate or more invented?
I'm going to go with innate.
Good. I don't know what I think until I fill in the blank.
Think about it.
Very good. That's fine. Can humans think without language?
Yes. Oh, definitely. That I know.
That's your certain.
I'm certain about that. I'm absolutely certain I'm right.
No, I really love when people I'm almost after people to feel they're certain some of the time. I love that because I think these are abstract questions. Who knows? So Chomsky says language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a whole it's community. It's a whole history of what creates a community. What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down?
I don't know if I'm going to get this exactly right, but there's language in it, but I find that singing is where I go when I want to express something, and I'll play songs, I'll sing songs that I know well to the point where the words are so baked in that it's more of an emotional act, even though there's information being conveyed in a song. But once you kind of get it inside you and move beyond the meaning of something, it becomes emotion with language, but the language is not necessarily it's not something that I'm tapping into and aware of while I'm doing it because I've done it so many times. It's like, like ritual, it becomes like a ritual.
Ritual is a great word, and I love you said singing. No one ever says singing.
Oh,
I like this guy a couple of months ago went group hug,
yeah.
when language breaks down, and then people always go, "Well, that's what language always breaks down." Well, that's fine, but what do we do? What do you do about it? And so there's an old saying that goes, "If you can't say it, sing it, and if you can't sing it, dance it." So I
Mhm.
love that middle step. If you can't say it, then, like, just sing it. Hum me a few words. Or is, why did the McLuhan's joke, "Why did the bee hum? Because it didn't know the words."
I gotta remember that.
Your observations of humans in general, I know it's both and stupid question. Are we more feeling beings or more thinking beings?
I'm more of a feeling being, but I think there's plenty of just thinking beings, and I've been around both. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I could land hard on one or the other because I think people are too complicated
Yeah,
and different.
because yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, that's all.
Yeah, because the thing is that we really can't separate feeling from thinking, but we think we can because we invented the words.
Mhm.
So we think, well, if we invented the word feeling and invented the word thinking, then we can separate them. Bridget Bardot says, "I don't think when I make love." And I'm like, "Good luck." You know, how can you do the most sensuous thing your body could do and turn your brain off? Or the people who meditate, they go, "Think about not thinking,"
Yeah.
to meditate.
I mean, Neil Young's got a saying, about playing because, "You think you stink."
That's good. Okay, so these are two questions from Alan Turing in 1950s.
Hmm.
Is thinking a function of the soul?
I'm gonna say yes, but I don't know why.
Yeah. Great answer, man. You don't have to have a reason why you answer these questions. You're just we're just filling content, right? But you're teaching me a lot. See, my whole thing is about me and you are examining the questions.
Hmm.
We're talking about the wording. So the second Turing question is, can machines think?
Certainly an interesting question now. I'm gonna say still not yet, but I think there's sort of gathering momentum that will maybe I'm going to be proven wrong tonight when I get home. you know,
Do you more pursue meaning or more pursue happiness?
meaning, yeah,
Yeah, I got that question from Viktor Frankl,
Hmm.
Man's Search for Meaning, and he says meaning lasts, happiness doesn't necessarily. Why do you think you answered meaning? Is it the lasting thing or is it something else?
I, it's funny. I was I was living in New York for 35 years, and I'm in a relatively rural area. And part of the reason that I decided to move here is because I really wanted to do what I'm doing now. And I've been thinking about this the last couple of weeks that, in a really basic way, for me, I've definitely always tried to live a life of purpose. And
Yeah.
that so to me, life of purpose, a life of meaning, kind of the same idea. And that's obviously people can define it however they want, but I've always, whether it was people I chose to hang out with or the kind of work that I did or the way that I did work, all that has all been wrapped up in like my sense of like, is this the right thing? Does it have meaning for me? Is something
Yeah.
that I ask myself and just intuitively expect it to be part of why I'm doing something. If I don't feel that after a while, I probably stop doing it.
JP, do you think you got that more from the way your parents raised you or on your own?
On my own,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah.
Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we actually creating it?
I think we're creating it, but I say that with no evidence at all, and probably, yeah, just fully an intuitive answer. But yeah, that would be my feeling that we're creating it.
What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
I'm going to go speed of thought, but
Do
not in the speed of thought and then like verbalizing it. No, but yeah, I mean, I think thoughts
yeah.
would probably travel faster. That's a really interesting question, though. I was literally talking about speed of light with a student today, and he was a bit of a math genius. He's a freshman, and he was talking about aspects of light that I didn't understand. It was interesting to come up.
Beautiful. That's funny because there's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one you got right. So Audre Lorde, the poet, said, "You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools." Yvonne Rainer responded, said, "You can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?"
Higher consciousness.
Wow, what an answer.
Thanks. I actually saw Audre Lorde speak when I was an undergraduate in a basement at Ohio Wesleyan, where I went to school for undergraduate. And then the summer of Black Lives Matter marches, and obviously with George Floyd, in my basically my backyard in Brooklyn was Prospect Park, and I mean it was kind of bittersweet, but there were all of these people protest. It was not even protesting; it was a protest of a kind, but it felt very powerful. And Audre Lorde's name was spoken about, and there were just thousands of people, and they were just erupting in cheers. And I remember going to a basement at this little Methodist college where I was going to school, and it was maybe 40 of us getting our minds blown, and and quite intimidating person, not surprisingly. And then I had this kind of conflicted feeling because on the one hand, I had been privy to this person who has taken on a much larger role in the cultural conversation than had been before, but also it seemed like the world was also the same in so many ways. And I had a lot of conflicting feelings about that moment. But I was with my kids, and when Audre Lorde's name was mentioned and some of her poetry was quoted, people just went crazy.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, it's interesting. I mean, she's a very loaded figure in my life in the last 5 years, especially because of what's been going on.
It's beautiful. I appreciate that. Yeah, anecdotes and stories are well welcomed here,
Sure.
indeed. So, what new toy do you suggest?
Hmm. It's not a toy, but I love exactly. But it's something I like. I really like my clip-on digital guitar tuner because it keeps my guitar in good tune, which means that I sing in tune. And so it's a gizmo. I'd say it's my favorite new gizmo. But I'm past the point where I buy toys, honestly.
Yeah. No, Gizmo is great. You ever see the movie Gizmo?
No.
Oh, dude, it is amazing. And I think it didn't get on YouTube, and maybe there's a little clip, or it's basically just a found footage collection of gizmos.
Oh, fun. Oh, I would love it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
gizmo is a great word. I love that word, gizmo. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
oh, I mean, I worry about the world heating up. I mean, I'm a journalist, so it's like I know way more than I want to know. I worry about I worry about the globe heating up. I worry about soil and water going through changes that are bad for growing food. I mean, how much time do you have? It's like, I don't want to bum people out, but yeah, that would be the big one in the front and center. I worry about the welfare of my children, though thank goodness they're in good shape and they're doing well. But I worry about their future a bit. Those would be the two that I think about the most. Um, I do. You know what? It's funny. I worked on a documentary about cyber terrorism, and I worry about all the things that we don't know in terms of anything to do with technology and hackability and what that can mean. And as we head toward 5G and the vulnerabilities. I also like to think that, things are always scary when you don't really know, but in the end, like sort of human decision making, good, bad, and indifferent, often will upend any kind of dire prediction that people have in ways that you don't predict. So it might be bad, but not in the way you think, and or it might be not as bad, or it could be worse, but not in a way that you think. And I think COVID taught us that for sure. I mean, I've been walking around wondering about a pandemic for many years, and then when it happened, it just wasn't anything like what I expected. It sucked in a million ways, and it was incredibly scary and obviously tragic for families. And I lived in Brooklyn, New York through the whole thing. I didn't leave town, but it was not what I thought.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't say it's given me comfort, but it's given me a sense that whatever it is, to quote Paul McCartney, something will happen, and something does happen. And sometimes um, it really surprises you. And the older I get, it's a cliche, but the older I get, the less I know, and the more I know that I'm limited in the understanding of the world.
Really well put, JP. And it's really, the flip is I do 4 interviews a week now
Hmm.
because of Zoom, because of COVID.
Yeah, there you go.
And I would have to go, JP, I'll be in New York this period, or will you be in LA? And could we set this up? And I've got to hit a button on a machine and make sure it works. It is amazing what COVID did for my interviewing
Hmm.
easeability. It's just like, it's such ease. And sorry to say, but all my events were live, and now they're all on Zoom, and people are more attentive on Zoom. If we were in a room together, we wouldn't be looking at each other's faces like, the whole time, and
Yeah.
our presence would be less. So I totally get what you're talking about, and I loved how you sussed it out. And you led perfectly into this question: as Marshall McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound,
Mhm.
that artists are the antenna of the race. And by artists, I mean musicians, painters, poets, everything, filmmakers. Artists are the antenna of the race, and they're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we can learn to cope with what we don't like about the inventions. So I ask you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Hmm. I would say in the States, certainly, the system that we exist in keeps people very, very busy. And there's good things about that and bad. But I think that it's hard to focus on. I mean, I have I raised 2 kids with my wife, and it's very hard to just stay in the idea of staying in the present. Like, I would have conversations with my kids sometimes, and they would have very astute observations from a very early age about being present and being engaged in the world. And they're absolutely right. But I also had to get them out the door to get to school, because they need to go to school, because they need to learn, because I don't have another option or idea for that other than, I guess, homeschooling, which wasn't what we did. Um, but that's how I would look at it. I mean, people are busy,
Yeah.
and we have not done ourselves any favors. I mean, this is not the most original concept, but we live in a world that is in any kind of capitalist society where it's based on consuming things. There are so many barriers to peace and quiet and contemplative behavior, because people need to sell stuff in order to bring stuff home to have a place to live and all that. It's really complicated, and so I don't make a judgment about people who can't stop and smell the roses, because they might be really busy, and they may be thinking about, in the abstract, trying to provide things for their family that they didn't have, and all the things that are baked into the American dream that are in many ways very positive. Um, and I think that's just, it would be very interesting. I can't get inside the head of somebody from South Korea, or someone from, Senegal, or someone from Singapore. Maybe it's a different way of thinking. I am limited, by the experiences that I've had, but that would be how I would think about it.
Yeah, it was good. Do artists have moral obligation?
Hmm. I'm going to answer this in a funny way. They should, but they don't always. And sometimes the ones that act as if they don't, I like a lot.
Agreed 100%. It's like when Louis Buñuel has a
I
bunch
love
of
them.
street punks kick the blind wino.
Oh,
I
geez.
like I sort of can take it, but I don't like, you know, teenage hoodlum films like, I don't know, Fight Club or whatever. I mean, it's just like, why do we let it slide on some and others, But
No, yeah,
that was a really good point. And, most people go, everybody has a moral obligation. I was like, well, Jesus, isn't that what's arts? I think art should do two things: fuck your shit up and make
yeah,
you go, I could do that,
yeah, 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 for
But it
sure.
is, I'm not against cuddly art that makes you feel warm and fuzzy, but
Yeah, and I'm not against people using art as a political statement, but a lot of time, in a political way, and I guess you could say everything is political. We do,
yeah,
but there are times when I've seen art and certainly music that's like, does that have any moral core to it? And it's both,
yeah,
there's some matrix that New York Magazine had about like highbrow and despicable or lowbrow and despicable, and it's kind of like that idea. Like there's this matrix, and sometimes I'll know that I'm liking something that at its core might be kind of despicable, but I'm aware that it's despicable, and I'm okay. I mean, I think that's, I try not to live my life that way, but I've caught myself at times enjoying things that I know are probably not, necessarily coming from a high moral or
yeah,
particularly well thought through moral position.
yeah. That used to be called "What's Your Guilty Pleasures?" Or,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
similar to that.
Exactly.
Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Hmm. I'm not afraid of ideas,
Yeah.
to be honest. I'm afraid of new ideas that seem like bad ideas that people go along with, you know? Yeah.
Well, that I got that question from, from Cage. He says, "I can't understand why people are frightened of new ideas. I'm frightened of the old ones." But it's more so this
Oh,
guy, Charles Kettering, he invented the, intermittent windshield wiper. He says, "People are very open-minded about new things as long as they're exactly like the old ones."
well, there's a lot of I actually read a book a couple years ago called Hit Makers, which sounds like it would be corny, but
Yeah,
one of the things that was in it that I found really interesting was this idea of why does something become popular? It's not this reductive, but one of the takeaways was things that often, and it seems so obvious, it's like one of those things like, yeah, you just explained common sense basically, but one of the things in that book that I thought was interesting was the idea that in order for something to catch kind of a critical mass, it has to be both familiar enough to be inviting to a person, but also novel enough to feel as if it's not exactly what you've seen. And I can see evidence of that all over the culture, and sometimes much closer to like we've already seen this or already had this. And there's,
yeah,
I mean, my gosh, in commercial film, you see that all the time. Commercial music.
yeah.
I thought that was I never thought of it like that. I think I'm late to the party on that. I think a lot of people.
No, I think it's a great observation because when grunge hit, I said, "This is just flannel shirt rock."
Yeah,
And then all of a sudden that was their outfit, and I went, "What?" And the same with reggae. When reggae hit, I was going, "This is Motown."
yeah,
That's because I was raised in the '60s when we heard Desmond Decker and the Israelites on pop radio, and they weren't going, "This is reggae." It
yeah,
was and we heard, "Oh Happy Days" gospel music on pop radio.
It's funny. I played in a band with a guy who I mean, I think a lot of people played with Desmond Decker, but I played in a band with a guy who was the drummer for Desmond Decker for a minute.
Yeah.
And yeah, he was around. And there's an interesting one of my sons was telling me this because he sat in on a class when he was touring schools, and he sat in an ethnomusicology class, and he hipped me to this, which I thought was cool. Was Fats Domino is huge in the reggae scene, which I didn't know. And the reason for it is that his music was very popular in the islands. And then obviously with sort of reimagining what a sound system should be, when you hear reggae, if you were to take a Fats Domino record and really drive the bass low and make it the dominant thing, you hear Fats Domino through that. So it's like basically Fats Domino's music was the blueprint really for a lot of early reggae. And I had no idea. And then once I heard it, I heard it. And there's another version of that, like idea of something so in your face that you don't even hear it, but yet it's an idea that's somehow tied to something you already know, but you don't realize you already know it.
Yeah.
Is there's this whole story where Little Richard, I love Little Richard, and there's these Little Richard songs where he'll scream, and his scream set off a whole rock and roll revolution of sexuality and all the stuff that we know. But what he was doing is, if you listen to the Little Richard songs now, when he screams, he's marking the solo, because they were playing these small recording studios and it was so loud no one knew when to take the solo. So his mark to the band was to scream at the top of his lungs. So every time you hear Little Richard scream, it's followed by a solo. And I remember when I heard that, I was like, that's crazy. Like it was purely like a mechanical sort of band leader move. It had nothing to do with how I had received it as this emotional idea of just like an exaltation of screaming. Have you ever heard that?
That is the reason I've done this for 40 years. I
Mhm.
want to learn things like this.
Me
And
too.
I'm amazed because I mean, this is a little different, but I love this one. Do you know why John Lee Hooker wore sunglasses on stage?
There you go. I do not.
Because he didn't want the audience to know he was crying.
Oh my gosh.
And
That,
every time I say it, I cry
yeah.
because to me, he is like so bare bones. And you would think, he sent I knew Captain Beefheart, and he sent Captain Beefheart a Christmas card once, and it was John Lee Hooker on the cover of this card with a beautiful blonde on his knee. And you open it up and it said, "Merry Christmas from your favorite hooker." Listen, JP, mine were too like incidental, funny anecdotes, but yours were real, based in things like I want to know about music, that we don't always know the roots of how things happen.
Mhm.
And that was really good. I love that. I'll never forget that Fats Domino bass and Little Richard scream. Yeah, my favorite line ever in a rock movie is Little Richard in the film about Jimi Hendrix. He goes, "Jimi Hendrix made my big toe shoot up inside my boot."
Just this last weekend, I was in Chicago, and there's a guy, if anyone's in Chicago, listen, there's a guy by the name of Johnny Twist, and he has his own museum, partly to himself and partly to blues legends. And he's, a guy that was a cat around Chicago. He played guitar with Coco Taylor for a good period of time. And he was talking to me because it's $10 and he lets you inside, and he's got this whole place set up and it's just jammed with stuff. If you're in the Bay Area and you've ever been to like Subway Guitars, like Fat Dog Guitars, it's like that. Like there's just stuff
Yeah.
everywhere. And I went in there and he said, there's five. I love this guy. He's like, there's 5 kinds of guitar players. I'm like, okay. He's like, there's low energy, there's sub low energy, there's medium energy, there's high energy, and there's extra high energy. He's like, what kind of energy do you think I was? I'm like, you're definitely extra high energy. He's like, you're right. And he also, every time, this guy was he's a Mississippi guy, but he's been in Chicago for 40 some years. And every time, I've never seen this before, but I did a little homework before I went to go visit. And so when he would say something, he'd be like, do you know why blah, blah, blah? And I'm like, yeah, because I read about it with you, or I saw it on YouTube. And every time I got an answer right, he'd go, pop. That was like his. I just thought, man, I've never seen that before. But yeah, I love that stuff. I mean, by the way, since you mentioned, I would love to hear any anecdote that you can tell me about Captain Beefheart because I'm a huge fan, as are both my kids. Like we talk about him, we listen
Yeah.
to his music all the time. Like I
Well,
think he's
here's what we'll do, JP. Simple. Let's just have a salon on Beefheart because if you are, I can gather 3 or 4 Beefheart fans, and then we or people who've known him
yeah,
and talked to him and whatever,
yeah.
and we'll just have a whole salon on him because yeah, an amazing human being indeed. It's like to Don, we'd just go pop, pop, pop. And then he'd go, "What's pop?" I said to him on the phone once, I says, "I hear you're having an art show in New York in the fall." And he goes, "What's the fall?" Now, most people would go, "That's just, he's bullshit." I really think, truly he came from this sort of, you know, whatever you want to call it, sort of like another mystery world or who
Yeah,
knows.
like a mystic.
Yeah, like a mystic. Like he stuck his head out of his mother's womb and he goes, I'm going back in. Okay, this is good because it leads into this. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
I don't know if it's my earliest, but I have an early memory. I was just thinking about this other day. I had this black rubber knife. It was like a pirate dagger when I was a little kid, and I just remember marking up my bedroom wall while sitting on my bed when I was really little. I remember that, and I also remember getting knocked over by our German Shepherd named Kurt over and over in the backyard, and both being kind of afraid of him, but also really liking him because he's a nice dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, he wasn't like he was a sweet dog, but he's big. He's way bigger than I was.
I like that the knife was rubber.
Yeah, it was very memorable. I mean, it was probably like that big, but as a kid, it just felt huge, and it was a dagger. It was like some kind of pirate dagger, and it was really rubbery. Like, and I remember I got caught like I marked up this white wall that was my bedroom wall. And I remember my mom came in, and at first I thought she was gonna get really mad because I knew I probably shouldn't be doing it. She's like, "Oh, you shouldn't do that." So I was just young enough where I probably wasn't gonna be like, "What are you doing?" But I kind of knew like I probably shouldn't be doing it, which is probably why I'm doing it.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Oh, I think it's a blessing.
Yeah.
I have a good memory. I've been told that, and I've got a relative, my nephew, who's a freshman in school right now. We both in our groups of family that people will say you don't seem to like. People will be like, I can't believe you remember that.
Yeah.
So we're one of those people. It's not as good as like photographic memory like that. I would like, but definitely memory for like what somebody said, what the weather was like, what they were wearing. Like I remember stuff like that a lot. Actually, it's kind of
Yeah.
weird.
Tell me someone in your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you like a role model, and what specifically was the impact?
I had an Aunt Marie who was a painter and quite talented, and she had some challenges. Like she had some mental health issues, but I loved her, and she was kind of the oddball black sheep of the family, and people would kind of talk about her in this disparaging way, kind of also out of concern too. But I remember thinking she's the cool one the whole time, and
Yeah.
and she would do that like the joke in the families that she'd like walk down the train tracks and come back with some total stranger. And in fact, stuff like that would happen. And she would always hang out with these characters that people were afraid of.
Yeah.
And I remember just thinking, like, yeah, she doesn't judge people. She's just cool. So she was my favorite. And in fact, she was a favorite of both my brother and sister too, I assume, because she was really kind and kooky, for sure, and then and talented. She would do stuff like I mean, this is like kind of more of an indication of things weren't all great for her, probably inside her head. But she would make a painting and it would win an award, like kind of a prestigious like award and like best painter in Wisconsin, or whatever. It's just like a Northwoods kid, and then she would paint over it, stuff like that. But I always remember being like really like kind of like intrigued by her. And then the other person I actually talked today, he's one of the subjects of a documentary film that I made called Big Paradise, and that's Robert Kidney, who's a fantastic performer and songwriter in Kent, Ohio, near where I grew up, and he's still playing
Yeah.
with band. He's an extraordinary treasure. He's a treasure, and as a young person, I would go see him, and I was so intimidated by him. And he didn't. Speaking of memory, he had no memory of me, and I would go see him play, and I was like, he was like my Lou Reed. I mean, I would see him. I saw him like 50 times,
Wow.
and every once in a while I'd work up the nerve to say something like, "Oh, you know," and be like, "Yeah, yeah, whatever, kid," you know, like he just couldn't be bothered. But then I circled back years later, and I said, "I want to make this film," and we've become really good friends. And he had a huge influence on me because he was and is a truly great American artist, and he is playing at his corner bar that he's been playing at with a quite good band. And even today, you can go to Kent, Ohio, or Akron, or Cleveland, and he'll be playing a couple times a month. And it's like seeing, actually, you know what? It's like Beefheart forged through an Appalachian toughness, like
Nice.
a working, tough,
Yeah.
uncompromising, great, absolutely great. And in fact, I don't know if you know the author Peter Guralnick.
Yes.
So I saw him speak this summer, and there was this Johnny Shines record that I was trying to track down, and I thought maybe I can write Peter Guralnick, but like, I bet that guy will know what this record is, because there's a song that I would play and I love it, but I didn't know the title. And I couldn't remember the record, and I had the record. I borrowed the record one summer when I was living with a friend in Providence, Rhode Island, when I was still in college, and I was trying to track it down. And I wrote Peter Guralnick, and he knew what it was, which was cool. So I could go back and listen to it, which I did. And then I mentioned Robert Kidney to him, because I said, you might want to know about this guy if you don't, because Bob's history is very tied to the Chicago blues, and he is truly, like, has received a lot of powerful sort of influence from blues players of the time. So he's like a vessel to carry on this tradition. And Guralnick knew all about him. He's like, oh yeah, I totally
Wow.
is. Yeah, which was cool.
I can't wait to learn more. That's great.
Yeah.
Were you raised a particular religion?
Baptized Catholic, but my mom, I was raised in a divorced family. My dad, I had a relationship with my dad, but he was not in the house growing up. And my mom was quite hostile to religion, which kind of carried on. Like, I'm not hostile toward religion, but so, you know, divorced family in the 60s, and being Catholic in a largely Catholic town was not easy on her. And so I can understand why she but I remember, actually, I mean, it feels kind of sad to say now, but I remember being kind of like straight up afraid of the priest, probably because my mom was, but I remember being like afraid to be judged and stuff like that by the priest. So yeah, not a very like, not a very good introduction into religion in my household.
JP, do you pray?
I do, through music. Yeah.
Good. If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Everything's going to be okay.
I like that. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I love the idea of evil using people, but I think evil exists within people. But I like that idea because it reminds me of Daniel Johnson's song about true love will find you in the end, and that love is this object that moves from person to person and is disembodied. So I like that concept a lot, but I don't think it works in practice. But again, I'm on the probably wrong about everything show. So
the real hidden question is, more so the follow-up is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Yeah. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I've tried that route and it wasn't always successful, frankly. I mean, I can actually think of one example where I was like, I really had a problem. And I generally get along with people, but there was one case where I had to work with somebody pretty closely and I completely tried that and it didn't work.
Yeah.
But I would, of the four, it was four, right? I think I would go with the Kennedy route. That one works for me.
Forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name.
I think
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely feel that way about reality television. I do not understand it. As a medium, I don't understand the appeal at all. I'm actually, it's funny. I've been thinking about this lately because I've worked in television for a good portion of my career, and it's funny more recently, especially probably not working in it, I find the imposed structure to be almost like assaultive. And I've been really interested in watching more experimental. And I mean, I always liked experimental work, and I always liked, quote unquote, art films. But I'm finding myself more and more drawn to that because it's surprising, and that's not for everybody. But I know I'm wandering a little bit from the original question, which I've already forgotten.
No,
So,
no, that's really good because yeah, it's just why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Because I like your use of the word assault, and then you called it surprising
mhm.
because there are some. That's my main thing is experimental film, and there's some films that are just like they're assaultive. Tony Conrad's The Flicker, tick, 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 tick,
Oh,
tick,
yeah, yeah, sure.
that's assaultive, but it is also surprising because you don't see it normally
Yeah,
because cinema was hijacked by story, by narrative, you know.
completely.
And
I've
what
been
actually it goes along with the question. Cinema was hijacked by filming plays. Peter Greenaway says Marty Scorsese's a good filmmaker, but he ain't doing nothing different than D.W. Griffith did. He's filming a play.
Yeah,
you know,
for sure. And I've been watching a lot of noir films. I just saw one that's actually very well. It's more than filming of a play, but very staged, but really good. Is called Out of the Fog.
yeah.
Ida Lupino. Whoa,
Oh,
she's so cool. And I remember watching during COVID, watching Seawolf with Edgar G. Robinson, and that's basically a play, and it's super stagey, but it's so well written that it just
so
doesn't. Oh, it's so good. We actually,
are we lucky or what that we had film noir happen?
oh my god,
That's the key is that it happened in the midst of that.
yeah, yeah.
But we'll get into film more. That was good. And so it's actually that's the next question. I mean, you're basically film writer, journalist, and musician, and there's a lot there. And then now you're per educator. What what was the tipping point on, let's say, a couple of them? Let's say journalism writing is one. What's your tipping point? You're reading stuff growing up, and then you go, "Oh, I can do that." And
Yeah.
then you're watching films, and you go, "Oh, I can do that." In music, you're hearing music, and I can do that. Sort of your tipping points on those three, and it's sort of like walk us through what you study in college.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for music, I remember getting. I mean, because I'm 300 years old, I remember um, the Beatles' Revolution, the fast version, as a 45, which I bought probably sometime after the Beatles broke up, and I remember playing it over and over and over and over, and I just couldn't get enough of it. Like it
Wow.
just had this hunger. And then I remember there was another 45 that was laying around, which was a Paul Revere one, which I didn't like as much, but I had the same thing. And there's an Edward or a William Burroughs term in Junkie. He calls it burning down the town, when you go and get all the drugs and there's nothing left. He burned it down. I burned down music in that way, and I still do it. I mean, I still find repetition. I'll find myself singing the same song sometimes 10, 15 times in a row. So we were
Yeah.
talking earlier, like prayer. That's kind of what I meant.
That's I have that same thing. You get in your head, it won't go away, but it's so soothing and it's like your lifeblood. That's what I
Yeah.
call it. Yeah.
Yeah. So for music, that's been that way. For writing, I mean, this is really cool for me to. I appreciate you asking me these questions because I hadn't thought about it like this. But for writing, I naturally always liked writing, but it was in college for sure when I read Joan Didion and a light bulb went off, and then I read Kapuscinski and a light bulb went off, and those were probably the two. And then a little bit later, Susan Orlean. So that style of like kind of journalistic, but also essayist. I mean, now it's a very, at least in the academy, it's a very fashionable sort of space, different writers, but, it's a much more studied thing. But I remember being really knocked out by that. And in fact, took music and that style of writing and combined them in my own way that I like to think is, it's my own thing in the same way that Randy Newman had his own thing, or
Yeah.
Lou Reed had his own thing, like a specific kind of aesthetic, or Ray Davies. I mean, those are people, Joni Mitchell. Those are people that I think about as kind of writers of a certain kind. So that would be it. And then for film,
Hold on one second before we go into film, because I didn't say this. I don't know what I think until and you said think it. And I forgot to tell you, I got the question because McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. And Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it.
yeah,
So that, and I just wanted to throw that in you that mentioning Didion. So go ahead.
yeah,
You enjoy.
I'd like to get back to that Joan Didion way of thinking, because I know I was there, but I haven't had the opportunity to write in the way that I would have liked to in recent years, because I've been busy doing all these other things. But I remember very well that feeling where, like, Robert Stone is an author who I like a lot, and I remember reading an interview where he talked about this one scene in one of his novels where a sea monster just emerges, and it's this kind of a jarring and unexpected moment, and he talks about how he didn't know it was happening until it happened. And it's like, I'd love to get into that kind of
Right.
a transcendental state, if that's the right way to put it. I
Yeah.
gotta get back there. I get there in music. When I'm writing music, I can find myself in that space. But writing an essay, I have to say I feel pretty,
Yeah.
like I kind of know what I'm doing, and I feel pretty
Yeah.
clear what I'm gonna write. And then for film, is it okay to go to film?
Please.
So for film, I was a newspaper reporter. Actually, I was a newspaper reporter. My first job. I wrote for the Village Voice, and then I went upstate because I got this job covering the prison system in Ulster and Orange counties in the Hudson Valley in New York, which was kind of what you would imagine. It was like a real eye opener into the world, and just seeing a whole, a sort of other culture and world that was fascinating and scary and upsetting, but like made me who I am today in terms of how I see our society and structures. Um, but I remember in that paper, this is classic, like small town, medium sized daily newspaper. Hunter Thompson worked there, and then they
No.
fired him. They fired him because he apparently assaulted a Coke machine with his bare feet and like broke it to pieces. and and they kind of boasted that, like, we had him but we fired him. I'm like, I don't know if I would brag about that. It's like you let one of the great journalists of an era go, and you don't even really, but it's very typical, like, newspaper kind of narrow-minded kind of thing of that time. But so I was there, and then I ended up just kind of walking you through, like, I ended up in television news because um, I got a call to work for Peter Jennings in New York, and I was like, I don't think I can say no. And I ended up working in an investigative unit and got really good training into how to do a long-term investigation. I worked with Lowell Bergman out of Berkeley and a bunch of other people over the years. And so I got sucked into the vortex of news almost by accident. I was in a newspaper because I liked writing. And then I found myself in this kind of hardcore investigative world. And it was so intoxicating because we literally at ABC News, we had a little office of 4 people. People would smoke cigarettes inside there, which was illegal in the building. Like everybody did whatever they felt like, because we were like this kind of unit that everybody was just kind of afraid of for some reason. But we literally had a red telephone that would ring, and if it rang, it would be like the head of the NSC or some high level CIA official. It was crazy. And so I was in this situation where I was really like, whoa, like, I mean, I was kind of a country kid, and I was
Yeah.
like, I could not believe the access to power and the way the world actually works. So it was very interesting to me. And so I stayed in that world for a long time. And the reason and I was at ABC News, I was at CBS News, I worked for Frontline, generally speaking, high quality TV news, quote unquote. But I bring it up because the visual form for me was always a, a thing of great stress and very little enjoyment because it was news. And then at a point when I got a job, I ended up working at HBO and like as a kind of a manager, I was like a executive overseeing other people's work. And it was the kind of job where like it was hard, but it wasn't like I didn't have extra time. And I thought I'm going to start making my own films. And it was then that I started to think about making films like I made music, which had always been free and without concern, because from the introduction of video, I never took a film course. I never worked in local news. I went straight to work for Peter Jennings. So I was always terrified to make a mistake, which is the worst thing possible for a person trying to figure out how to do filmmaking. So I learned filmmaking much, much later. However, I'd been, I'm totally self-taught, but I'd been a big fan of Les Blank's films and things like that.
There you go.
Amazing. And so a lot of the work that I've done is really very much like based on my appreciation of a character study of an outsider within a culture, of the kind of person who is uncompromising, and they're just going to do, if they're a performer that's never going to get rich, they may never be a household name, but they're never going to stop. That's my kind of character study. I just love people like that. So I arrived at filmmaking really late, and it wasn't until, again, I started to think about filmmaking like music that I actually enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Not that television is filmmaking, but like video, basically. I didn't enjoy it. It's stressful.
That was really well spoken, and I love Les Blank. And let's just carry on, because the perfect next question is, a screenwriting teacher told me great film or great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great film or great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process? When you're writing a song or making a film, what role does intention play?
I'm happiest when I don't know what my intention is, and I'm writing songs that I don't even understand. And it does happen.
That is good.
That's the best.
That is, and then Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much do you think of your listener or your viewer when you're making your song or your film?
This is a great question. I was talking with a songwriter friend of mine in Nashville named Aaron Lee Tatchin, and Aaron's a sweetheart and a really interesting person and great songwriter and all that. And we were talking about this, and I remember saying, I was in his place in East Nashville, and we were like outside and just talking about songwriting, which I love to talk about. And I remember saying, there's times that I imagine, and I don't know why, but I imagine a very specific Midwestern kitchen, not one that I've ever lived in or maybe even been in, but that's the room that I hear the music, and there's someone else in that room, but I don't know who they are. And I go back to that space from time to time. And I don't know what that means, but
it's probably John Prine's back kitchen.
That's hilarious, right? Like some kind of like being John Malkovich portal.
So McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness, like knife and fork extends our teeth, shutter and a camera extends our eyelid. Like religion or philosophy, non-tangible could be extension of consciousness. What does the writing utensil extend for you? Whether it's a pen or a keyboard, what humanness? McLuhan called it human sensorium, but I call it humanness. What humanness does the writing utensil extend? You know, you're writing as a journalist or you're writing a song lyric. What do you think?
Boy, it's funny. I don't write longhand anymore. And so I've robbed myself of that experience. I mean, I type out pretty much everything at this point.
But I mean, even the keyboard, what does the keyboard extend? Your fingers on the keyboard.
Does it extend?
What humanness does it extend? Or I shouldn't say your fingers, I should say the keyboard rather than the pen. What does the keyboard extend? What humanness?
Gosh, I don't even know how to answer that because I feel like I could say something that would sound good, but wouldn't
Right.
be authentic, Like, I don't
Yeah,
know.
that's fine. No,
Yeah.
that's fine. Yeah, this poet said, "Oh, it extends my tears." And people they actually I sort of cheated. This guy a couple days ago said extends my fingers.
Hmm.
So, it's all right. Let's move on. So,
I will say one thing. I mean, it reminds me of an anecdote. I mean, there's something that in this anecdote that I thought was really interesting. I remember reading. I was a big fan of Truman Capote, short stories especially, and I remember reading an interview with him where he talked about how he hated the physical act of writing, and I loved writing, and I like typing. I like Actually, right now it's funny. I have a keyboard. This is my own. I have a keyboard that has the keys are sticking all the time, and I just need to get this dealt with. And maybe this is why I was having trouble answering that question. But it's messing with my flow of things over the last month. But I've been like so busy because I'm in a new job that I haven't done anything about it. But I find that I'm having to retype things over and over. And so you know what? There it is. That's the answer. Like I need to just get a new keyboard and then I can answer that question more effectively because
yeah,
I'm blocked myself. That's what it is.
it's good. I love that. He hates the act because that's what Gore Vidal said about, I think he said it about Kerouac. He's like, that's not writing, that's just typing.
I remember, yeah, that's mean too, man. I remember when I heard that. Yeah.
But indeed, I think it pushes it. That's what writing is typing.
Yeah.
So you still like you can just type anything. I mean, you know, but what do you think the motive of the cave artist was? Not what anthropologists necessarily say or Herzog's movie or whatever. Your
Mhm.
hunch.
I think kind of going back to early in the conversation, like acknowledging or trying to find a contour or a trace of one's own consciousness
Yeah,
and a statement that you exist.
yeah. What's
Fundamental.
more? Go ahead.
No, no, that's all.
What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Wow. Do I have to choose between the two?
You dude, here's the 25. I got that from Christine McKenna. That was my first question 40 years ago. Basically, I
Yeah,
started
that's a
asking.
tough one.
I got it from her, and this guy once said, "Well, I'll let you answer. I'll tell you one
Well, I'm
fun.
curious. What I know it's compromise and or conviction. What was the question though exactly between the
What's
two?
what's more important, conviction or compromise?"
I mean, I think given the state of the world now, I think compromise.
Yeah,
But I might have thought conviction as a younger person, but the world that I see now, there's a lot of convictions, and it's creating
yeah,
so much discontent and strife between people.
yeah.
Would be my take.
That's what your thing is to acknowledge your own consciousness. I ask these questions because I want people to answer them how I like to hear them answered, but I don't. It's fine if you don't. And
Mhm.
I want to hear people say compromise because everybody knows you're born convicted on something or another, but
Yeah.
people want to be, I'm true to my beliefs, I'm convicted. But this guy, I says, what's more important, conviction or compromise? He says, depends on what you mean by important.
I
So
like
he shifted the emphasis from
that.
the two key words. So this again is another stupid question, but it's like
I like that.
rate these three things in your accomplishments. You've accomplished a lot, JP. Luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest role, second and third?
To write them down. I'm going to say ambition, luck, and skill.
Ambitions first,
Yeah.
luck, and then skill. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's true. And I mean, you make your own luck and skill you work at, and,
Yeah.
you know,
And then the golfer said, the more you practice, the luckier you get.
yeah, no doubt. No,
Yeah.
I actually did a story about curses in baseball, hexes and stuff. And I
Yeah.
went to Yankee Stadium, walked around, and asked all these New York Yankees like about little rituals they had, and they weren't too into talking about it. But one guy was kind of pissed, and I remember he said like, "Yeah, I'll tell you what it is. Like, the harder you work, the luckier you get." Like he just wasn't into even the idea of what we were talking about because he was so single minded. Like he
Yep.
was actually offended, you
Yeah.
know. And I mean, years later, I see that as a gift, but at the time, I'm like, I'm just trying to do a story, Mac, and it was like this whole, you know, I just get a lot of pushback. But now it's like that's exactly the answer that I deserved. I just wasn't ready to receive it.
It's really the beauty is, JP, that in retrospect, you can see that,
Mhm.
that you don't just carry that like that's what T.S. Eliot said poetry's outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Bleeding with bleed.
Very good. You really got that one. Okay. Two of my film heroes, George Manupelli says, ignore yourself. Jonas Mika says, there is no self expression. And Cecil Taylor says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. I
Mhm.
know it's both and it depends, but is art making more self expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever technology, cultures, and environments are dominant?
I see myself completely as a vehicle, and most songwriters in particular that I really admire. I may be already biased toward that answer, but I've had that experience where something's happening and I'm not in control of it, and it's an amazing state to be in, and I've heard other songwriters talk about it, and I think that's like that state of bliss that you strive for to get to the point where it really is something is happening beyond your control but coming through you, and it's thrilling. And the best work that at least that I've ever done in music is that way. Filmmaking is a very different process for me. I can imagine some filmmakers. I never got to a point where I felt so loose in the moment to be able to just make a film like that. To me, film is it doesn't have to be labored, and it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be so regimented, but there are so many layers to the production of it, that it's a different process to me. Whereas I think music, really, you do, and certainly writing, but definitely music has this kind of interesting confluence of a melody and language and coming together in ways that you're not planning, that can be surprising and really beautiful. And I mean, I live for that, and I still every once in a while I'll have it happen, and I just feel so fortunate that it'll happen rather than having to grind out a
Yeah.
t- you know
It's amazing because McLuhan loved the line, the Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can.
Yeah, right?
That's like, I'm not going to sit down and write a song. I'm just sitting here in a song tomorrow. But the hidden question in that one is, can art making be egoless?
I think so.
Yeah. Is perception reality?
Yes.
You're knocking them out of the park, dude. Why is it so difficult for wait, we got to go into music. I almost forgot because we've all so what's the function of music?
I think it's the springboard into the soul.
So that's good. Yeah, that's what Cage said. His Zen teacher told him, function of music is to soothe the soul and make it susceptible for divine intervention.
Yeah, I agree.
But, we've talked about a lot of things that we've found that we like in common, like Captain Beefheart.
Mhm.
My other friend says the three T's of music are theory, technique, and taste. So theory, you learn how to play the what chords and structure. Technique, you know how to play it. How does one acquire taste?
That's a really good question. I mean, it's funny, like, I actually the first 2, what is it, technique and what was the other one? Sorry.
Theory.
Oh, theory and technique. I have neither. I'm totally self-taught, um, and never took a lesson and play wrong all the time. Um, so I don't even totally relate to that, but I think it's true, and I wish I had it. I mean, technique, I guess I have at this point. I have my own technique, but theory, I have none. But I guess taste. I mean, I can say I don't know where it comes from, but in the when I'm discussing with students I'm speaking with want to go off and work in documentary film or some kind of more creative but also journalistic endeavor. And something that came to me at a point when I got to a point in my career where I kind of was out of the stage of being a ham and egger and just having to like do whatever people told me, but actually being in a position to direct
Yeah.
taste and sensibility. Something that a friend of mine talked about that I think is really true, certainly in journalism and I think in film, maybe less so in music, is first you have ability and then you have sensibility. And ability you have to get in the door typically, and sensibility is what is the thing that will distinguish you from other people, and that takes time. But once you develop a kind of sensibility where you really are unique in your approach and you bring something to a process or a way of thinking, that's where you become more valued, you
Yeah.
know. Um, and so it's good to be a good worker and it's good to show up and do the work. But if you really want to kind of be in a position to have exert some kind of control over some process, sensibility is ultimately the most important thing. So taste and sensibility, I think, is kind of same idea,
Yeah.
basically. And where it comes from, I think it is those repetitive acts. I'm actually, you're opening my mind. So the repetitive acts combined with some sort of, call it a sort of higher power divine intervention over a period of time that
Yeah.
you're rewarded through your repetition, you get somewhere beyond just repetition.
Yeah. You know what most people say? Exposure. That's how you get taste. And it
Oh,
sounds good. It's like, oh, yeah, we listen to underground radio and they turn me on to this. But, it's also discerning and it's like the trickery with words. One question is what's more fundamental, music or language? Well, someone said aesthetics and anesthesia are really close word wise.
mm,
And so, that what taste is? Anesthesia? Like, oh, I like this band and I don't like that band.
mm.
We don't know. So I like that you have a certainty, but you're not afraid to say, I'm not sure. That's important to me. And this is what McLuhan's main thing was, suspended judgment. When you're with one or more people, you try not to have a point of view. He said, understanding is not having a point of view. And we think it's like, oh, I understand, but understanding is not having. But when you're in your lonely teenage room, you can go, I love Facebook or I hate it. But when you're with one or more people, if you're willing to say, oh, I'll consider that, um,
That was the whole driving force for me to go into journalism was, and I mean, many people will talk about it, but to me, and everybody has, different reasons. Some people want to bring down the local mayor. Some people get off
right.
on putting their foot in the door. Some people want to be on TV. Some people are driven by access to power. I mean, you name it. But there are many people that I know, and certainly the journalists that I relate to, they love the idea of being allowed to get in experiences that get them out of their own head and try to understand other perspectives. That was completely what I was into,
Yeah.
and still am. And I still think, it's hard to make a living doing that sort of journalism. I think it's a worthwhile way to look
Yeah.
at it
Yeah.
personally.
It's called comprehensive awareness. You study pattern recognition leads to comprehensive awareness. You get the big picture. Then you can go, well, I'm going to lean more towards this or that, but at least she entertained it. So here's another McLuhan line that I'd love to your knowledge of music. Song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference.
Wow. Can you read that again? Because
Yeah.
it's
No,
like
I'm constantly, I don't know what it means. And it's funny. People go, I agree with half of that. But
it's funny.
it's
I'm
so,
reminded of the Homer Simpson part where he's getting high in the attic with the local bus driver, and Marge comes in and says, "Homer, what are you doing with your life?" And he says, "Whoa, whoa, one question at a time."
Song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical tastes is ultimately connected to language difference.
Oh, I totally agree with that. And in
Yeah.
fact, I mean, this turned out to be, I think, among ethnomusicologists, sort of like disproven, but I just thought it was a super interesting concept. When I first moved to New York City, Alan Lomax was speaking at the New York Public Library. And I
Yeah.
went to go see Alan Lomax speak, and he gave this speech. And again, I mean, I think a lot of people, it would be a very like, it would be the wrong thing to hang your hat on in this climate, environment, understanding about people. It has all sort of like post-colonial baggage with it. But what he was getting at was, I thought was fascinating, was he was trying to study how vocal quality was affected by sexual mores of an environment. So, for example, south of Spain vocal style, very low, very sonorous, very sensual. And then in areas of, say, the Middle East, where religion in certain parts of the Middle East has a very strong hold on sexual mores and might be described as, by some people as like much more repressive or uptight, basically.
Yeah.
The vocal style was much more um, sort of, what's the term? Just more strained.
Yeah.
And it is true that the sounds are different. Now, whether or not it's because of a sexual component, who's to say? But I remember it got me thinking about, right, we're different, like we sound different. So what is behind that? And I applaud the fact that he was trying to figure it out. He got just absolutely roasted for that. And it
Oh,
was sort of at the end of his career. It was pretty bad. Um, and I don't know the scholarship. Like I just remember him talking about it. I remember thinking at the time, I don't know. It seems like you know what you're doing, but I have no idea. But I
yeah.
did think that the distinctions that he was making and what he was trying to find seemed like they were coming from a place of trying to understand difference in a way. So, kind of to your point, that we could see one another more wholly. But maybe actually made a mess of that. But I just thought it was a really interesting idea to even think that way. It
Yeah.
was literally like my first week in New York City. It's
I
like they
love I love that. That's beautiful because a guy a month ago told me he's a Polish guy who translated Finnegan's Wake. First of
oh
all, you can't translate the book. It has 60 languages in it. But he did it, and he was very intelligent. He said that he learned that Russian women get more out of sex than Eastern European women. They're like more into it because just that whole thing, they're more suppressed. So then they enjoy sex more. But I
wow.
would say your Lomax thing is perfect for Ema Sumac because
Mm.
she's like this woman from like Brooklyn who claims she was from South America,
I remember
and
that.
did
Yeah.
that's like the litmus test. Well, let's try some Ema But I have to ask you this because you're so well versed in music. Can you tell me an instrumental that makes you laugh?
I mean, it's funny. Instrumental, not so much, but there were times when I would listen to parts in Beef Heart songs where I would absolutely laugh. Like instrumental sections. Bat Chain Puller,
Yeah,
hilarious to me.
yeah,
Um, Hilarious. Dada's car.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
yeah,
that's a great answer. Great
yeah,
answer. I
yeah.
think
I mean, Beefheart is the one that like when because I remember listening to Zappa and I was like, oh, this is really interesting and intricate music, and then I listened to Beefheart and I just started laughing. And I
yeah.
remember like thinking like, what is happening? Like when I first listened to Beefheart, I remember I felt like I'd been pushed off a dock. Like I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what was going on, and but I felt like whoever pushed me, like I was probably gonna like them, because they pushed me. They didn't push me in a way that was hurtful, but so
Well, I'm gonna set up our beef art salon. It's gonna be called Pushed Off a Dock. DOC.
yeah.
Oh, that was beautiful. It's so, laughter, what is the function of laughter?
I mean, the release of sorrow and tension and sadness, I'd say.
Yeah, because Gurdjieff said the function of laughter is the reconciliation of yes and no. So this goes to this thing about this saying, you create what you resist. So I'm not saying you, JP, but one creates what one resists. Bob Goldthwait morphed it into you are what you hate. James Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. And Louis Buñuel said, thank God I'm an atheist. So it's a lot of thoughts, but it's basically your feelings on this line. You create what you resist.
There's an essay by Cynthia Ozick about repression that's kind of related to this that I thought was really interesting, and she talks about how I'm sorry I can't remember the name of the essay because I read it like literally about 40 years ago, but
Yeah.
it's stuck with me. Which was a basic idea, like for example, if you grow up in an environment that's like your parents grew up in an environment that was very, very poor, and then they become wealthy, that anxiety over the lack of wealth will be translated in some new fun way to the kid getting spoiled rotten. So all the avoidance of the pain of what lack of money did will come in some kind of new way. And that was a big idea to me of that idea. And it's kind of like the Philip Larkin, they fuck you up, your mom and dad. They really do, like that kind of notion. And in the sense that people really try to, and I mean, as a parent, I still don't know exactly how this is going to work out, but my kids I think are doing great, and at the same time, there are all kinds of things in my behaviors and my wife's behaviors, our interactions together, that I'm sure have transmitted something to my kids that I'm not really fully aware of, but it's probably the thing that I was trying to avoid doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's perfect answer, dude. You're like the ideal for this. So Moshe Feldenkrais, because again, it leads perfect. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're taught to overcome a weakness.
Yeah.
Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
I mean, it can be perceived as a weakness in our culture, but I think being sensitive to other people's feelings,
Yeah.
um, and I think in a position I'm in working with students, I like to think that, I mean, I know that in some cases I'm definitely a professor mentor that students will come to because they know that I won't judge them and I'm a kind of quote unquote safe space. So something that I felt sort of conflicted about growing up, which was, red-blooded all-American boy playing sports. I was the homecoming king of my high school. Like I was a Midwestern kid with all the stuff with it, but I think I was very sensitive and I tried to hide that. And as I've gotten older and more secure, I think I've become more sensitive and more loving, and and try to help other people as best that I can. And that's the sort of thing that, I grew up in a culture, maybe you did or didn't, but like nice guys finish last, and girls don't like the nice guy, like they like the bad guy and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. And so I think I grew up thinking a lot about that in those terms, but now I feel very differently and really try to be to conduct myself in an honorable way and sensitive to other people, and recognize that some people have things harder, and that it's not just like step on the weak one, but in fact try to pick the weak one up and try to help them. Even though myself, I didn't feel like weak exactly, but I felt conflicted about being sensitive to other people, because I mean, we know, like, growing up, I grew up without a dad, so I didn't even have any kind of like hyper masculine modeling going on in my house, like quite
Right.
the opposite, but it was still everywhere in the culture. And there's that film
Yeah.
Boyhood. The
Oh, yeah. Perfect.
there's scenes in that. I watched that with my wife, and there's scenes in that I was just like, that is so right on. It's
Oh,
like exactly like it is. And, I think a lot of women watch that and think like, oh my God, it's so brutal. It's like, it is, it
yeah.
totally is. So that's the kind of thing, like, trying to restore like those times when I might have like known that someone was getting bullied, maybe not right in front of me, but like I knew something was up, and not being afraid to like stand up to that sort of thing out of a sense of duty to protect a weaker person. So I think that's like getting in more touch with that, if that answers the question.
Great. Yeah. No, I was kudos to Richard Linklater. That was great.
Yeah.
How do you find peace of mind?
Again, I think through music, and lately through nature.
Yeah.
Um, I'm in a rural part of Indiana now. It's absolutely beautiful. Like, I mean, I grew up in Ohio, and Indiana, in my mind, always kind of like the image of is like, that place sucks, because we'd always drive across the northern part of the state, and it was really flat. But where I am, it's like populated by like covered bridges and like ice cream stands, and it's like very beautiful. And
Oh, yeah.
so I've been really surprised how much, and I'll visit friends, in Cleveland or Chicago or Columbus, Ohio. Columbus is a little different because it's a little more spread out. But I'll go to like more urban environments, and I'm really struck by how intense they are. I haven't been back to New York since I took this job in July, and I'm
Wow.
kind of bracing myself. Like, what's it feel like? Because right now, I'm really digging the rural aspect of it. I mean, ask me in the dead of winter how I feel about it here, but like that's kind of how it is right now.
It's beautiful. JP, these are 5 Alan Watts questions just off the top of your head in a few words.
Yes,
1, who started it all?
I'm going to say God.
Are we going to make it?
Yes,
Where do we put it?
in our hip pocket.
Love it. Who's cleaning it up?
I'm cleaning up with my friends.
Beautiful. Is it serious?
Very serious.
Nice. If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
I would say don't take yourself so seriously,
It's good.
but with love, in a way that wouldn't seem like a put down.
Yeah. So, just to go back, when you asked that baseball guy, he didn't really want to reveal his um hexes, or what do you call it?
Yeah, like jinxes and stuff like that.
Jinxes. When I asked Dr. John all these questions,
Cool.
the 12-year-old one was the only one. He goes, I won't go there. I thought that was classic
Yeah.
because it's sort of like something like New Orleans voodoo or something.
I one time I interviewed Robert Moog, the inventor of the synthesizer,
Yeah.
and I said, "So tell me about your childhood." And he went, "Oh, wow." I was like, I felt like, "Oh, sorry."
Yeah. Well, just a couple more. I really appreciate this.
Sure.
Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
Think over. Yeah, I know that one.
Why?
I know I'm right. That's just the way it's been done, and that's all you need to know.
Well, why you're right too is 99% of people say over, and the patent from 110 years old has it going over. But the funny thing is the people who say under, they have reasons. On what occasion do you lie?
What occasion do I lie? It's funny. I really try not to lie, and I mean, I grew up in an environment where there's a fair amount of deception going on, and it took me a long time to not. It took me a long time to feel comfortable enough to just say what I thought, and so and I don't think it's an accident that I ended up in a business, if you want to call it that these days, of journalism, where you're trying to make sense of reality and you're trying to have some kind of sense of truth, and there's ground rules and sort of general expectations about honesty. I think that's like deeply encoded in why I went into it. I need to see a shrink on that one because I've thought about this a lot. But I've already forgotten the question because I went down a road there. What was the question?
On what occasion do you lie?
I really try not to lie. Generally speaking, I would lie and say like it's a wonderful cake when it's not.
Yeah.
Um, Simple stuff that people lie about. I might lie to protect another person. I would certainly lie to protect myself if it was so dire that I knew that if I didn't lie, it was going to be a big problem. But I don't think I've got myself in enough trouble where I have to lie about something that I would feel bad about. You know?
Yeah. Well, in regards to that truth thing, this is another Louis Buñuel line. I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it.
Oh yeah, no, it's the
No,
worst.
no, 99% of people love that. One guy said, "That's bullshit because I'm gonna seek something, I'm gonna wanna find it and believe I'm going to find it."
Hmm.
So I morphed it into this question, and I love Buñuel saying that because I agree because it's forever in flux. But I morphed it into this question that goes, the cliche is turned into an archetype that the journey is more important than the destination. Why do we have to name or seek a destination if the journey is more important?
That is such a good question that I don't have an answer for it.
Yeah, because I'll tell you, it's flaneur. The guys in the people in Paris in the 20s called psychogeography just sit at coffee houses and wander and do nothing. It's slackers, and that you might have epiphanies if you don't necessarily name a destination. But most people say you got to have a focus. You got to know something where you're going. You know,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely had like I'm definitely much more process oriented or like with music, for example. I remember seeing I mean, I was already kind of playing music, but I remember seeing Robert Kidney and just thinking, I want to do that.
yeah,
And it's kind of as simple as that for
yeah.
me.
I think it's the freedom you sensed he had. He had some freedom in. Monk says that music is math, but it's more than that. It's like unexplainable.
I think it's unexplainable. And I think it is like for me, loving film, loving writing, loving good journalism, music wins every time for me, every time.
Yep. Okay, a couple more. We're out of here. This is really fun. Tell me something good you never had and you never want. It's good, you never had it, but you never want it.
Hmm. Like a house by a lake.
A house by a lake. That's a good answer. Okay. What if you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face? What would you do?
Well, actually, I am in a bag of vomit, which is funny that you bring it up. No, what would I do?
You're in a bag of vomit, but then they threw a bag of shit at your face. What would you do?
I would. How about this? I extend it. When they fart, I would say thank you.
That is Thank you for being so astute. It's really been fun.
Yeah.
Um, what's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
People reassessing the the life that's been laid out in the American way, which I love my country, but we're seeing a shift. COVID's changed everything. I really like seeing young people saying, I don't need to do that. I'm not going to do that and
Yeah,
seek something else. I think that's a good sign,
it's a good
honestly.
sign, definitely. Two more and we're out of here. This is Thornton Wilder. He said, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But Art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for 90 minutes, JP. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this, but
Yeah.
what's it really all about for you?
Yeah. Well, first I can tell you something that was like a thrill for me is I got accepted to the McDowell Art Colony to make a film, and,
Yeah.
and I slept in Thornton Wilder's room.
Oh, how cool.
Super cool. And like I kind of cried when it happened. Because I
Right.
remember he was, we were talking about early influences. Our Town was an early influence. I was in that play as a young kid, and I remember being really moved. Like, wow, I never thought that I would ever be in a position where I could even have this happen, let alone talk to someone about it. Like amazing. I haven't thought about that, but I think the thing that I hide most is my own sense that like, why do I need to create to be happy, and what's wrong with me, and I just had a conversation today with a person who's trying to put together a film, and was kind of saying as much like, there's a scene in this Grateful Dead documentary that I thought was excellent, where Jerry Garcia is talking to the camera people, and he said, you can film us, or you can just choose not to. And they're all on LSD, so they chose not to. And I thought it was the most interesting part of the whole film, because
Yeah.
like, who doesn't do the thing that they just came there to do? And there
Yeah.
was a kind of powerful freedom in that. So that would be like my insecurity that drove me to leave a small town to move to New York City to try to create, uh, you know, a body of work, as well as like an image around myself that I thought would impress other people, doesn't matter to me like it used to. Um,
Yeah.
and what will I become next is really interesting and important to me. And I don't know. So I'm a little like, I'm searching for that. But again, it's like service of others and living a life of purpose is the definition of that is in flux in me right now.
Yeah. Dude, that really resonates with one of my favorites. Auden the poet basically
Oh,
said, the mystery of art is that we don't know if it activates or pacifies us. Now, being artists, we want to go, no, it does. And Bertolt Brecht said, I want art that activates, not puts you in a trance. But
yeah.
talk about the dead. You could go into a trance at a dead show and become totally activated and change your life. So, pacifying or trance can have its services. Activating can have its services, but they both have disservices too. So that's the key word in the Auden is the mystery of art. We don't know. But it ain't going to keep us from trying. Like Sidney Lumet, they said, can films do anything? He goes, no, but it ain't going to keep me from trying.
Great.
Okay, last question is what gives you the most optimism?
Young people.
Yeah, that's the answer I get the most. It is amazing.
Young people, and maybe most specifically my kids, my two
Yeah.
kids.
And you talk to your kids about Beefheart? Did I hear that
Oh
correctly?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, my son Chris and Sam would both probably love to be on this. So if there's an option, I mean, I think they'd be way into it.
Oh, I would do both of them with all these same questions because I'm always trying to get people of all ages. But I will hold you to that. Let's do a Beefheart salon. I'll send you some possible dates, and I'm going to send you an invite to this other music salon we're doing because you'd just be perfect for it. And we got a few people that you be interesting to you. And
Yeah, yeah. Cool.
JP, what a pleasure, man. Who introduced us again? Do you
It
know?
was through Alan Bisbert at Please Kill Me. Yeah,
What's
Uh,
his name?
Alan Bisbert. I think I think
Alan.
yeah, Alan is the one. And I
I'm
suspect it might be because I did a story on
Chuck
Eden.
Stapp.
Yeah, oh, Chuck Statler too. Yeah, he did the Devo videos, and then also I did a piece on Brian Chittister, who is the foremost
Brian.
expert on Eden Abez, who is a fascinating character to me.
Right, right. Yeah. No, Brian's a dear friend, and Chuck,
Oh, yeah.
I really want to interview Chuck if you can hook me up. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, I'll send you
yeah,
his info.
yeah,
I'll make an intro. Yeah, I will say he's like he did. I had to kind of talk him into doing it because he had done a
yeah,
bunch, but he did a great job, and he took it very seriously. And I loved that interview. I thought it came out really
good.
well. Yeah. Anyway, well, thanks so
Dude,
much.
thank you so much. Although I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever. Thank you, JP.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.